A 79-year-old retired Marine walks into a regional pistol-caliber carbine match carrying a battered, original World War II Thompson submachine gun. Wood furniture worn smooth, the front grip splintered along one edge, the drum magazine pitted with 60 years of holster wear. The young competitors loading their match-tuned 9mm carbines glance over and start cracking jokes loud enough for him to hear. "Wrong century, old-timer. That thing weighs more than my whole rig. Hope the barrel doesn't fall off mid-stage." The old man doesn't argue. He doesn't even look up. He just checks the action twice, the way he was taught to do it in 1965, sets the safety, and waits for his squad to be called to the line. Before we get into what happened in the next 4 seconds, the run that silenced every smirk, the reveal that brought a retired Marine to tears in the gallery, the moment a set of dog tags slipped out of a worn canvas pouch and changed everything for 42 young shooters, do me one favour. If you believe an old warrior deserves respect no matter how scarred his rifle looks, or how slow he walks to the line, type the word honour in the comments below. Type it for the men who taught us that the rifle never made the Marine. The Marine made the rifle. Now let me tell you who Master Gunnery Sergeant Earl Whitaker really was, and why no one on that range had the slightest idea what was about to happen. Earl Whitaker grew up on a tobacco farm outside Greenville, Tennessee, the kind of place where a boy learned to shoot a squirrel rifle before he learned long division. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1963, 4 months after his 18th birthday, and by the spring of 1965 he was wading through chest-high elephant grass in the 1st Corps Tactical Zone of South Vietnam. His first weapon in country wasn't an M14, and it wasn't an M16. It was a Thompson, a holdover from the Korean War still issued to certain Marine reconnaissance units, who valued the .45 ACP's stopping power in close jungle work where engagements rarely opened past 15 metres. Earl carried that Thompson on 41 long-range patrols. He carried it through the siege of Khe Sanh. He carried it on the night of February 7th, 1968, when his 6-man team was ambushed in a dry creek bed outside Lang Vei, and the Thompson, fed from a 30-round stick magazine, was the only weapon in the patrol that didn't jam in the rain. He came home in 1969 with 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star he refused to talk about, and the Thompson itself, legally registered under the National Firearms Act through a quiet arrangement with a commanding officer who understood that some weapons belonged with the men who had bled beside them. The match was held at a private range in the foothills of East Tennessee, sponsored by a regional shooting league that pulled competitors from 4 states. Most of the shooters were men in their 20s and 30s, software engineers, off-duty police officers, the kind of crowd that builds custom rifles in their garages and argues trigger pull weights on internet forums until 2 in the morning. Their carbines were works of mechanical art, billet receivers, match barrels, red dot optics 0 to 1/4 MOA, suppressors threaded onto barrels that had never seen mud. Earl arrived alone in a 1994 Ford Ranger with a hand-painted Marine Corps emblem on the tailgate. He wore a faded utility cover, a flannel shirt buttoned to the throat, and carpenter jeans held up by a web belt. The Thompson rode in a hard case lined with an old wool blanket. When he opened that case at the staging area, the conversations around him paused, then resumed a notch louder. The jokes started almost immediately. A bearded shooter in expensive Crye precision pants leaned toward his buddy and muttered something about Al Capone. Another asked, loud enough to carry, whether the old man had wandered in from the wrong gun show. Earl heard every word. He didn't react. He had heard worse from drill instructors at Paris Island when he was 18 years old, and from NVA loudspeakers in the dark. The first stage was called Tennessee Steel, 6 12-inch round plates at 25 yards, engaged in any order, 4-second par time. The young shooters who went before Earl posted clean runs in the high 2-second range, their suppressed PCCs barely making a sound. When the range officer called Whitaker to the line, every conversation died. 42 competitors and a dozen spectators turned to watch. Earl shouldered the Thompson, all 11 pounds loaded, the wooden stock dark with 60 years of palm oil, and gave a small nod. The buzzer sounded. What happened next is preserved on 3 different cell phone videos, and people who weren't there still argue about what they saw. The Thompson barked 6 times in 2.8 seconds, semi-automatic, every shot a deliberate trigger press, and 6 steel plates rang in sequence from left to right like a struck xylophone. The recoil that should have rocked a man Earl's size barely moved the muzzle off the next target. He had shot the stage faster than the match leader, with iron sights, with a weapon designed when Calvin Coolidge was president, firing a cartridge twice as heavy as anything else on the line. The range officer stared at his timer for a long moment before he remembered to call the time. Nobody laughed. The next stage was a movement drill. Engage 2 targets at 15 yards, transition to cover, engage 3 more at 30. Earl moved like a man half his age. The Thompson tucked into his shoulder pocket exactly the way the old Marine Corps marksmanship manuals diagrammed. He didn't run. He glided, low and quiet, the way you move when there is something in the tree line that wants to kill you. 5 shots, 5 hits, all A-zone. Stage 3 was a precision course at 50 yards. 2-inch dots on white paper, shot from a kneeling position. The young competitors with their magnified optics struggled to clean it. Earl, with iron sights and reading glasses he didn't bother to put on, dropped 1 shot a half-inch off centre. Stage 4 was a barricade run. By now the squad behind him had stopped talking entirely. The bearded man in the expensive pants was filming. A woman from the scoring tent had walked over to watch and forgotten to walk back. Halfway through Stage 4, an older gentleman in a Vietnam Veterans of America cap eased his way through the crowd, until he was standing at the edge of the shooting bay. He watched Earl run the barricade, 1 knee up, 1 knee down, the Thompson tracking smooth between targets, and his hand went slowly to his mouth. He recognized the way the old man moved before he recognized the man himself. The Vietnam vet's name was Daniel Reyes, and he was 63 years old, a retired Memphis homicide detective who had served as a young rifleman in the same Marine Recon Battalion as Earl, though 12 years later. He had grown up on the stories about a master gunnery sergeant who carried a Thompson into the bush and brought every man home alive 41 times in a row. He had seen one photograph of him, a grainy black and white from a battalion newsletter taken outside Khe Sanh in 1968. That photograph hung framed on the wall of Reyes's home office. When Earl finished Stage 4 and walked back toward his hard case, Reyes stepped forward and said very quietly, "Master Guns." Earl looked up. The 2 men held each other's eyes for a long second, and then Earl nodded just once, the smallest movement, and Reyes's hand came up to his cover in a perfect parade ground salute. The bearded shooter in the cry pants lowered his phone. The match director, a 50-year-old former army captain who had been about to call the next squad to the line, stopped where he stood. Reyes turned to the crowd and said, in a voice that carried across the entire range, "Gentlemen, you don't know what you're looking at. Put your guns down for a minute and let me tell you." Reyes spoke for less than 3 minutes, but they were the longest 3 minutes of that morning. He told them about the Marine Recon teams of the late 60s, the men who walked into the Ho Chi Minh Trail in 6-man sticks and called artillery on themselves when they had to. He told them about the Thompson, why it was still carried, why it was loved, why the men who used it never traded it in for an M16 even when they were ordered to. He told them about February 7th, 1968, the dry creek bed outside Lang Vei, the monsoon rain that had turned every other weapon in the team into useless steel. He told them that the man standing in front of them, the man they had been laughing at 20 minutes earlier, had personally carried 2 wounded Marines 2.5 miles through hostile territory while pursuing NVA with that exact Thompson, the same wooden stock, the same drum magazine, the same splintered front grip. He told them about the silver star Earl had refused to wear and the second one he had refused to even accept. The crowd had gone completely silent. Earl stood with the Thompson cradled across his forearms the way a man cradles something sacred, and the wind moved the brim of his utility cover, and somewhere in the back of the gallery another older man, nobody knew his name, began very quietly to cry. The bearded shooter in the cry precision pants was the first to walk forward. His name was Tyler, he was 31 years old, and he had been the loudest of the morning's hecklers. He stopped about 6 feet from Earl and tried to say something and couldn't. Then he straightened up, took off his expensive ball cap and said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I didn't know." Earl looked at him for a long moment with eyes that had seen things Tyler couldn't imagine, and then the old Marine extended his right hand and said, in a voice softer than anyone expected, "Son, you weren't supposed to know. That's the whole point. You just shoot your match." Tyler shook the offered hand. He was crying and he didn't care who saw. One by one, the other competitors came forward. The young software engineer who had made the Al Capone joke, the off-duty police officer who had snickered about the barrel falling off, the match director who walked up last and rendered a slow, deliberate salute that Earl returned with the easy precision of a man who had saluted 10,000 times. Nobody mentioned the scoring sheets. Nobody cared anymore who was winning. The match continued. Earl insisted on it, insisted that everyone shoot every stage and earn every point. But something fundamental had shifted on that range, and every man and woman there could feel it. Earl Whitaker won the match by 11 seconds. He shot every remaining stage with that battered Thompson, never missed an A-zone hit on a paper target, never dropped a steel plate, and when he walked off the final bay, the entire field of competitors was waiting for him in a loose double rank. The match director presented him with the first place trophy, a small wooden plaque with a brass plate, and Earl accepted it the way he accepted everything, quietly, with a small nod, with no speech. But before he walked back to his Ford Ranger, he turned to the crowd and said the only public words he spoke that day. He said, "This rifle isn't mine. It belongs to every Marine who ever carried one and didn't come home. I just hold it for them." Then he packed the Thompson back into its case, lined with the old wool blanket, and drove out of the range gate with the Vietnam Veterans of America sticker on his bumper, catching the late morning light. Daniel Reyes stood in the parking lot watching him go, and the bearded shooter named Tyler stood beside him, and neither man said anything for a long time. 3 weeks later, the Regional Shooting League quietly announced a new annual award, the Whitaker Cup, given each year to the competitor who best embodies what they called the quiet standard of the old corps. Earl Whitaker still shoots that match every year. He is 81 now, the Thompson has the same splintered grip and the same pitted drum, and the wood is darker than ever from another 2 seasons of Tennessee summers in his hands. The young competitors who once mocked him now line up to shake his hand at the staging area, and the new shooters who do not know the story get the story whispered to them by the old hands before the first stage is called. Tyler, the bearded shooter in the expensive pants, drove 400 miles last spring to attend a Marine Corps League meeting in Greenville, just to sit in the back of the room and listen to Earl tell the rest of his Vietnam stories to a younger crowd. He says it changed his life. He says he was raised to respect the flag, but he did not understand what the flag was made of until that morning at the match. There is a lesson in this story, and it is the oldest lesson in the world. Never judge a man by what he carries or how he looks, or how slowly he moves to the line. The greatest warriors in any generation are almost always the quietest ones, and the most dangerous weapon on any range is the one in the hands of the man who has already used it for real. Some weapons are obsolete. The men who carried them never were. If this story moved you, if you believe America's old veterans deserve to be honoured and recognised and remembered, while they are still with us, subscribe to this channel. We tell their stories so the next generation will know what was paid, by whom, and at what cost. Type the word honour one more time in the comments below. Share this video with a young shooter who needs to hear it. And if you ever see an old man at a range with a battered rifle that looks like it shouldn't be there, sit down, shut up, and watch. You might just learn something the manuals cannot teach you.